Good morning, colleagues. Hi. Here you are. Good morning, sir. How are you today? And well, you're muted, by the way.
Yes. I'm saying thank you. I'm very well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good.
Morning, good morning, colleagues.
Good morning, Anita. Good morning.
How is everyone?
We're all doing well.
I'm fine.
Do you want me to keep this background or you want my personal background?
Sorry?
This one is good.
This one is good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. I don't see, it looks like we only have our colleagues here. I don't see journalists yet. I only see ECA. So maybe we give it a couple more minutes, maybe 3 more minutes.
Yeah.
So they can, yeah. Okay. All right.
I'm in your hands.
I'll take you on a safe ride, smooth ride.
Let me know when they're there and we need to kick off. Ernest, I'm just going to look at some emails in the meantime, if you don't mind.
Wonderful. Okay,
Thank
sounds good. I'll signal you. All right. Mr. Chinganya?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's 8 minutes past 11. I'm wondering if we shouldn't just start, because we have about 5, 6 journalists right now, and out of respect for those who were on time, I'd suggest we get started. We had about 27 to 30 confirmation, but we have 6 online now. The good thing is this has been recorded, so we can still share, and of course the presentation will be shared. So if it's okay with you, we can get started.
Yes, I think let's get started.
I'm more than happy to do this. Shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So officially, good morning to everybody, and we have some journalists connecting from different parts of the continent. I don't know if it's afternoon. I think it's morning everywhere now. Good morning to you, and thanks indeed for accepting our invitation to this ECA press briefing. For those who are in Ethiopia, we had an in-person interaction with a number of you last month or a couple of months ago. And one of the things that came out of that conversation is the need for us to have this constant, consistent interaction with the media. And so this is something we plan to do on a monthly basis. And this definitely is our inaugural ECA monthly press briefing. And thank you very much for to Mr. Chinganya Oliver, who's the director of the Africa Center for Statistics, for accepting to kickstart this process for us. So he is going to be taking us on a journey on how we as Africa can transform and modernize our national statistics systems. And one of the things that I'm very excited about is something they call digital census. Just for me, to get a sense of, why is this important? What is it about? If there is digital census, then there's something else. What is the other thing? And how ECA as an institution is supporting member states to embrace this. What is the feedback? What's the response at the level of a member state? But also for the media, who we consider an integral part, essential stakeholders, key stakeholders in our role, in our work to delivering a prosperous Africa. What do we expect from them? Data statistics is something they need to do their work. It's something we as a continent need to grow. So what are some of the major takeaways? What would you like for them to walk away from here with? How would you like for them to tell the story of Africa's growth, including statistics and data, in a way that is very simple for the average African to understand, but also for policymakers to get a good sense of what is it we're trying to convey? Before I hand the floor to you, Mr. Chinganya, I'd like to also introduce our new director, not our new director, our director, who manages the communication sections, the conference section, and the IT section at the ECA. So Nita, please, if you don't mind, I know this is a bit sudden, but if you don't mind saying a few words to the journalists who I know you've been really wanting to meet and talk to, very briefly before we officially hand over to Mr. Chinganya. You have the floor.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ernest, and greetings, Oliver. Greetings, all colleagues who are here, and greetings, all journalists who have joined us. It is a great pleasure to kick off this press briefing series. I'm Nita Diapal Singh, as Ernest has said. I am the director responsible for the communication sections, amongst other things. And it is a great pleasure to have this, although I was saying to Ernest, it would be good to have this physically, but we will wait a little bit until we can do this in person. And we will be pleased to host you and have you in our quarters, hopefully sooner rather than the later. But in the meantime, we thought, we will not wait until we can meet physically to kick off this press briefing series, because we have so much work and so much things to share with you, and so much that we can collaborate together, because as journalists, I am sure you look for data. I mean, in this era of data verification and fight against fake news as well, I think it is important, and more so, it is there's more responsibility, I think, on responsible journalism to verify facts and data, and to put forward the accurate data for people, not only people who are reading you, but even policymakers. I think policymakers is one of our audience. And one of our stakeholders, we want to influence policy, but in order to influence policy, data is important. So if you say so many women, or how many percentage of women are not able to access resources, economic resources, social resources, this is compelling, and it can build up not only for the policymaker, but for population and civil society to build up the campaign, the push for equal rights, which is what we're all working for. We all want our African brothers and sisters to have the basic tools so that they can realize the potential. In order to do that, the infrastructure, the state infrastructure, has to be built. And when we say the state infrastructure has to be built, we have to have the data that supports what we claim. So I'm very happy to have you all here today. I hope, as I say again, we will be able to meet in person very soon, sooner rather than later. But I'm very pleased that we start this series with Oliver, my colleague Oliver, who heads the statistics division, and more than that. This is close to my heart, because in my training, I've trained as an actuarial mathematician. So statistics have been part and parcel of all my growing up, my real growing up, I would say. So I'm very, very pleased to be here with Oliver today. So thank you, Ernest. Thank you, Ernest and Sophia and all the colleagues who have helped to make this happen. I'm very happy that we're kickstarting this, and I'm sure we will get momentum. So thank you very much, and over to you, Ernest, and thank you, Oliver, for agreeing for doing this. I'm going to apologize because I have many things to take care of today, but I wanted to be here for the introduction and leave it in the good hands of Ernest and Oliver. Thank you very much, and à bientôt. Over to you, Ernest.
À bientôt, Anita. Thank you very much. Now, Oliver, you should pull her over to crunch some numbers when you need to do so. All right, so I'll officially hand over to you now, Oliver. You have the floor.
Thank you very much.
Just for information, is that Oliver is going to do his presentation, but then at the end of it, we'll keep it open now so that if you have questions, then of course, Oliver is there and to provide the answers that you might need. But also, I think the slides, the presentations will be shared to you by our team. Over.
Thank you very much, Ernest, and it's really a pleasure to be here and we are talking to the journalists this morning. I hope this is the beginning of really a good journey that we can be able to work with the journalists. What I'm going to present to you this morning, it's really on the transforming and modernizing our national statistical systems, and really really what I would call the tip of an iceberg, because I think what we want to do at some point is to deep dive into very separate areas of statistics, which we can talk about, as you will see when I make the presentation today. I hope you're able to see my presentation. So why do we want to modernize the national statistical systems on the continent? First of all, I want to mention here that there is demand for data in many respects. We have demand for data at the moment that needs to be informed, that needs to inform the Agenda 2030. We have demand for data that will inform Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, the sub-regional agendas that also have to be informed. We have the national development plans at country levels that needs to be informed. We have the sub-regional plans that needs to be informed in provinces and regions and so forth. But also we have other frameworks like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that requires data if we have to have a proper understanding of what the CFTA is about. On the other hand, we have the suppliers of data or the producers of data and statistics. And what we have seen over the last couple of years is that because the suppliers are using the traditional data approaches in collecting, in computing and putting data together, the data gap has continued to increase. And also not just because they are not able to provide the data, is that the demand of data, which comes in different forms, it has continued to increase many folds. And as a result, there is really a challenge on how we fill up that gap to ensure that all the agendas, all the frameworks that we have are able to be informed by the data that is available. And especially that now we also have other players that have come into the fore, whom I call the data enthusiasts, data technologists that are also trying to fill the space, provide all sorts of data to inform different agendas. However, even with the situation that we have seen in the last many years now, we also saw that during the COVID period, we were challenged, serious challenge, and our national statistical systems were challenged due to COVID. We saw in many of the countries that surveys were postponed or they were completely halted. And you talk about being postponed, you talk about 29% of the surveys that were suspended. They could not deal with it because they did not have the capacity. 25% of the countries could not continue doing 25% of the survey could not be continued because they didn't have the capacity to continue collecting data, and because of the COVID. As you know, traditional way of collecting data, it means that you actually go to the source or to the supplier of the data in person and collect that data. But under COVID, that was not possible. The data collector in this case could not go to the market, for instance, to collect data, or to an industry to collect data, because even the industry itself was closed, the market itself was closed. So there was really, really a challenge because we're using these traditional methods. And this is one of the reasons that I would like to speak to you today about the transforming of national statistical systems. So what we saw under COVID was that our national statistical system were constrained. They did not have the capacity to adapt with the changes, with the crisis that the continent was facing. They were not able to provide the data that was required, even at the time of COVID itself, to be able to monitor and manage the crisis itself. And unfortunately, because we are very low in statistical literacy, in other words, in understanding what kind of information is required, that even made a bigger challenge during this period. Of course, there are other countries that were able to continue doing the work because they have, to some extent, been able to manage or adapt to the changes. In fact, about 7% of those countries were able to do that. But at the same time, what we saw, if I'll just talk about a little bit, what we saw about some of the areas, for instance, the Consumer Price Index, what is commonly referred to as the CPI, the data production in many of these countries temporarily halted, because they could not go to the places where they're supposed to collect information, like for instance, in the markets, in the supermarkets, in areas where, in open areas where they're supposed to collect data, because there were no people there. So even the measurement of the Consumer Price Index, which helps us to measure inflation, was equally a challenge. We also, during that same period, that, for instance, when we talk about registration of births, registration of deaths, people were not able to register the birth because the registration offices were closed. People were not able to register their deaths because the registration places were closed. In many cases, we saw a number of deaths that were people that died and were never registered because there was no one to register. In fact, in many cases at the peak of COVID, there were people that were buried even without their relatives. So you can imagine in those kinds of situations where you have to physically go and register, and the system does not allow because you have to physically be there to be able to register, becomes a really big challenge. So what does that actually mean? It means for Africa's national statistical systems to begin to adapt and create a resilient system, we need to innovate. We need to transform. We need to modernize our statistical systems and really make them much more resilient in the event that we're going to face another crisis in the future. And God forbid that we don't get into that situation. So what have we done at the ECA, in particular the Africa Center for Statistics, that we worked with the national statistical offices across the continent to come up with what we call the Africa Group on Transformation and Modernization of the National Statistical System. And out of that, it was agreed that some heads of statistical offices would sit together and be able to come and chart a way forward on how we can deal with this under the leadership of ECA. So the objective of that was really to strategically guide and coordinate the work on the transformation and the modernization of statistical systems in the continent. And under the leadership of South Africa, with the other countries that are participating. And we made sure there's a geographical representation in the selection of those countries that are part of that group that is sharing the work around modernization on the continent under the leadership of ECA. So one of the things that came out of there, that looking at the challenges that we are facing as a continent, was that we needed to develop a mechanism of how to address that. And that one of those mechanisms was to come up with technical teams which will address several issues. Some of those issues will be digitalization and integration of data using data science and big data itself. Can we use modern technologies? Can we use modern approaches to be able to collect data rather than having to use the traditional sources where we have to go in person with a paper and collect information from the household, or indeed from the enterprise? And that will also change the way we collect data, the survey methodologies themselves. Can we look at the survey methodologies and adapt modern technologies of collecting data using new gadgets that are available? And the third component of this part of the technical team that was thought about is the coordination of the national statistical systems. In other words, revising the coordination. So how best can we work? Can we identify other people, other agencies? Can we work with academia? Can we work with the civil society, the NGOs, the private sector, to make sure that we are able to have an integrated and much more coherent, coordinated national statistical system? And that also means that changing the statistical legislation to be able to accommodate other players. As you know, in many of our countries, the custodian and authority of collection of data is the national statistical offices. And therefore, there's need to revise the statistical legislation to be able to accommodate that. But not only that, that because we were mainly looking at the traditional sources of collecting data, that we now begin to think about collecting administrative data, data that automatically comes by processes or by records that are made available, and also using other data sources, for instance, telephones and other areas where we can be able to collect data. This is basically, I think, the same thing that I've already described in terms of the three technical teams that were put in place: digitalization, survey methodology, and the coordination to ensure that also the statistical legislation is put in place. Now, there are tools that we have put in place in the process of transforming and modernizing the statistical system on the continent. First of all, I think in doing that, there are two levels that we look at. First of all, you need to assess the national statistical system of the country. And the second part, to be able to design for it. So in the assessment of the statistical system, there are a couple of things that needs to be considered. First of all, is the capacity. Is the country able, or has it got the capacity to be able to adapt the new methodologies, the new approaches, the modern way of doing things? What would be the outputs if they were to modernize? Are the outputs that are being produced at the moment optimal to be able to serve the audience? What are the data needs? What do countries need? What are the citizens themselves looking for? Those questions have to be answered. And finally, you need to begin to prepare how to validate and come up with a report that is accepted through a consultative process by all stakeholders. And once you've done that, then you begin to identify what are the strategic goals, where do we want to go, and for how long do we want to have a strategy that is elaborate to be able to inform and produce the data that's required to inform the various decision processes at country level within a particular sphere. Now, once that has been thought through, there's been a number of activities that we've been undertaking towards modernizing of the national statistical systems in Africa. And I'm going to talk about these in several aspects. And I want to start with one which the moderator talked about in issues when talked about the census, and that sits around the demographic and social statistics. Here, the focus really is to see how we can modernize the methods of demographic data collection and management of that data. How are we going to collect that data in a much more prudent manner, in a way that it's quicker and made available to the users as quickly as possible? So we looked at the digital censuses. Now, this is the work that we started in Ethiopia when Ethiopia was planning to do their census, and unfortunately we could not continue, but we started working and developing the necessary applications that are required to ensure that there's quality, there's timeliness and efficiency of data. And that did not work here. We went to Kenya to do that. And Kenya adapted the tools that we developed. Out of that, we have now been able to develop what we call digital census that ensure that there's the deployment of the IT applications in itself, and that they allow improvement of the quality, the timeliness and efficiency of data. And so far, we've been able to provide support in addition to Kenya, the one that I've mentioned, and we've been able to provide support to Nigeria, Zambia, Mauritius, Togo, Liberia, Ghana, and more recently also in Sierra Leone. We've also been able, in the process, we realized that some countries, they had a different type of problem. They did not have the gadgets, the tools that are required to collect the data. So ECA, through the leadership, we were able to come up with another mechanism to approach that. We purchased some tablets, but in addition to that, we're able to leverage with those countries that purchased tablets earlier on to see if they can share. In this case, Kenya had bought so many tablets, and we agreed with the Kenya, look, can you share some of the tablets? Fortunately, the President Uhuru, His Excellency the President Uhuru of Kenya, agreed to share about 45,000 tablets, which we've been able to share to a number of countries, including Togo, Gambia, Sierra Leone, and Burundi. We now what we call a tablet sharing data bank that we allow to be able to share with many other countries. So in many of these areas, we have been providing support, including Somalia. If you could imagine the challenges that are there, but we've been able to provide support in Somalia. Another area where we've been strengthening using the latest methodologies and approaches is around the legal identity in Africa. So there is what is called the civil registration and vital statistics, and part of that, we have what is called the civil registration and identity management. And again, the purpose of that is to make sure that we have a universal, holistic approach of coming up with an identity that is functional, that countries can actually use. So far, we've been providing support to 10 countries in Burkina Faso, Malawi, Lesotho, Angola, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, DRC, and Somalia, including Eswatini and Guinea-Bissau. But also what we have done, given what I said earlier on, that we had challenges during the COVID, that mothers' deaths were not being registered, people that died were not being registered, was how do we vitalize, modernize the civil registration itself by making it much more accessible and also being able to provide information in a timely manner. So we've provided now the technology that allows to collect information in a much quicker way in what we call the eCRVS and also the e-identity platform that we created to ensure that there's interoperability in a real-time manner. That's one of the things that we've done. And also we've been able to do that also through the SDG related indicators on health. So part of the things that we have also been doing is to ensure that the gender part in this data collection process is not left behind. We've made sure that there's a gender data network that's put in place and helping countries to build the necessary capacity. So far, we are working in a few countries to start with. We have 4 countries, Zimbabwe, Sudan, Mozambique, and Burundi. All this to try and modernize, to sensitize countries to be able to come up with new approaches, et cetera, et cetera. But as we do this, we also want to leverage on our convening power, where we bring countries together to begin to think very critically, where do we want to go to modernize so that we can be like any other country, the other countries in the West, or indeed even in Eastern Asia, where they've been able to modernize. So we have a statutory meeting that is coming up in October this year. This is the 6th conference of ministers responsible for civil registration. And part of that really is to see how we can begin to integrate the issues around civil registration and identity management to be able to guide policy going forward. But in addition to that, around the demographic and social statistics is the work around poverty measurement. Again, we're working in a few countries, to start with 4 countries, to adapt to what we call the multidimensional poverty index. And this is coming up very well. And hopefully soon we'll have a report where at some point, as I said earlier on, we'll come down to discuss a little bit more about poverty issues on the continent. What are we doing in economic statistics? Again, just to sample a few areas, and I'm focusing much more on national accounts, which is the one where we measure the gross domestic product, or what is commonly called the GDP. And I'm also going to talk about the consumer price index. This is where we talk about inflation. Now, on the national accounts, focusing much more on the GDP part, one of the things that we've realized there is that we needed to update the national accounts. So there's pieces of work that are going around there to update the current version of the national accounts. What we call the systems of national accounts for 2008 is going to be updated so that we can come up with another system of national accounts for 2025. So there's a testing process to make sure that new thinking of measurement of our economies is taking place. And this is, we're working very closely with the global agency, in this case, the United Nations Statistical Division in New York, to pilot this particular work. So part of that is also rebasing. We provide a lot of assistance to countries to update the rebasing of the national accounts. In other words, to remeasure how the economies look like, because obviously 10 years ago, economy cannot be the same as today. So we want to see economies, how do they compare today to 10 years ago? So that's the rebasing that we're talking about there. But in that process also, we are working very closely to use other methods of measuring GDP using the big data and other ways of measuring so that we can be able to produce the data in much more timely fashion. The other component is the consumer price index. As I mentioned earlier on, most of our countries produce the consumer price index by basically going to the markets to collect data, weigh them, and come up with a price change compared to last month. And what we realized under COVID that it was not possible, and it is going to be difficult if we have similar crises going forward. So we are now coming up with different approaches of doing this, of collecting data, coming up with different techniques and approaches. And one of them is what we call the CAPI, this is the computer-assisted interviews, and also the telephone, computer telephone personal interviews. That's what we also undertake. And of course, it is difficult to eliminate completely the data collection that is done in person. So there's some kind of hybrid, if you like, where you're using latest methodology and also in addition to the traditional. And the latest methodology talks about web scraping or even scanning, where you actually go in a supermarket, look at the prices, and you have a system where you're just passing, you're scanning the prices for those items that are in your consumer basket of goods and services, which you want to measure your price and inflation in that particular area. Now, one of the things that we've been, which is related to that, which we have been doing, that in 2020, we launched what is called the ECA Price Watch Center. And on a quarterly basis, we've been able to meet ministers and preceding that, the journalists themselves to discuss the price development on the continent. And the idea really there to see how the price developments are roaring or are evolving in countries over a period of time, and to see where the pain or the stress is in terms of price development or inflation development in a country. So this Price Watch Center provides an update and also analysis, but also update. Update the price information that is being collected from countries. And this is where you as journalists really want to appeal to you, is that we would need as much data as possible in good time to be able to fulfill the agenda and the objective of us being able to provide information to you and the citizens themselves. And it's important that countries be able to provide that information, to provide that regional comparison across the continent. Another piece of work that we do is the geospatial information. And this is an overlaying of information on maps for easy visualization, for easy understanding. And in there, we have 5 areas that we concentrate on. First of all, is developing the policies around geoinformation and geoinformation statistics. The second part is development of the tools. The third part is actually the statistics themselves, the geostats that needs to be developed. And of course, identifying the partners that we need to work with. And finally, is the capacity around that area. Now, in terms of the key work areas around those pillars, one of them is building of the national spatial data infrastructures. And the focus there is the integration of geospatial framework. Here, the focus that we have been doing is working with the countries in very specific areas by coming up with action plans to integrate the geo-information and working with several others. And the idea really here is to be able to have partially enabled e-services that are digitally created, if you like, to ensure that we have a digital transformation and also to be able to bridge the digital divide. The second part, of course, is the guidelines that are required to do that in terms of policy. And we've been able to develop what we call a conceptual index of multi-composite indicators that will ensure that African countries progress in managing the geospatial information policies and resources. And also been able to develop guidelines on geocoding using geospatial techniques in analyzing the data, particularly for sensors, since we are now talking about census 2020 round. And of course, there's been a lot of fieldwork projects that we undertake to support countries in many areas, working with various agencies at the country level. And one of the areas that also is to help countries come up with very, very special platforms or geoportals, in this case, to be able to provide second level administrative boundaries for a few countries that we've been able to do that, develop the maps, and to make sure that they are also compliance with the SDG data. Again, like the civil registration, we have a meeting that's going to be held about the same time, again, to relook where do we want to take the work about geospatial on the continent. What we call the 8th session on the UNDGIM Africa. That will be done in conjunction with the civil registration, but also with the Statistical Commission, which I'm going to talk about a little later. Now, here are some of the examples that we've been able to do around the work of transforming and modernizing of national statistical systems. We've been able to support countries, for instance, like Malawi, first of all, to develop legislation and a strategy that allows the National Statistical Malawi to be somewhat autonomy. And autonomy here, we must take it in the sense that to give it much more authority and independence to do more work without intervention, or rather interruptions. We've been able to provide support to the Seychelles to develop what we call the National Strategy for Development of Statistics. We've done a similar kind of in terms of evaluating the strategy for Djibouti. We've also been able to provide work around the statelessness of statistics. And this, most of it, as you know, during the webinar has been done through the webinars because, in-person meetings have been very, very difficult. And in this part of the work as we transform is that we are also developing a roadmap for countries because we cannot go to the countries at the same time, and therefore we need some kind of a guideline. So we're producing a strategy that will provide a roadmap on how they should be able to modernize and transform their national statistical system. So part of the modernization is the innovation part of it. So part of that innovation at the ECA, we have created what we call a data science campus. But that data science campus has been twinned with the data science campus, which sits in Rwanda. So we're working very closely with Rwanda to set up a data science campus. And the data science campus is really about tapping on the potential of big data and the use of administrative data and other sources. In other words, how do we use other sources other than traditional ways of collecting data? That's what it's all about, data science. Can we use quicker method, that would be able to inform policymakers in much more quicker form than it was in the past, where data is collected. It takes about a year or sometimes even 2 years to have the data sent on to the user. We're trying to cut off that. And we have also set up what is called the UN Regional Hub, which does exactly the same as the big data science. So we have embedded the two, that we have the data science and then we have the regional hub, which is also being set here at ECA and working very closely in Rwanda to be able to attend to the issues of the potentials of big data. We have also developed a dashboard to inform different policy implementation in Botswana. We've provided the digital censuses. Digital census is basically, it is a process where data is collected using gadgets, tablets, mobile phones, and the results come out within 3 months. The first one, when we did in Kenya, it was 3 months data was out. And in some cases like Ghana, it's even getting shorter and shorter for collecting data. In other words, you are now able to collect information and inform decision process in a much shorter period than it was a few years ago when data was to be collected and it took years to get data out. So far the process, the support has been to Seychelles, Mauritius, in developing the dashboard that end-to-end dashboard that is required to track the progress of undertaking the census in the country. So we have Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Zambia, Burundi, Togo, Senegal, Nigeria, and many more that are coming on the way. But also we realized that to do this, we needed to change mindset of the statistical leadership in countries to adapt the process of transforming and modernizing national statistical system. So we are working with others to be able to come up with a leadership and training program to help countries change the way they look at things and adapt to much more rigor way of doing things. Now, specifically, what have we done and what are we doing at the moment in Ethiopia? In Ethiopia, some of you may already be aware that they have changed the name of the office. It's from what it was called before, which was the Authority on Statistical Service, on Statistical Authority for Statistics. It now is being called the Ethiopian Statistical Service, unlike what it was before. And part of that is they've allowed us to work with them to review the law itself. So a new law has been developed, which we've provided support from our end. They've also in the process of finalizing the development of the National Strategy for Development of Statistics, which is really a driver for the modernization of statistics that we're talking about here. There is also a 10-year vision that's been defined by the Ethiopian Statistical Service. And they've also begun to engage the users to make sure that their needs are addressed. And they're also part of this strategy that's being developed. Now, away from the modernization, I also wanted to talk about something that we just launched, although it's been there for some time, but we've decided to launch it officially. And this is about SDG tracking. We've developed a dashboard. And there, the question that one wants to ask is that, is Africa on track to achieve the Agenda 2030 by 2030 itself, and equally even Agenda 2063? And here's the situation. First of all, Africa, unlike other regions, we have two bigger frameworks that we have to report to. One is 2030 Agenda, which is on sustainable development. The other one is Agenda 2063, which is the Africa we want. Both agendas leverage or they ride on what we call the 5 pillars. And those 5 pillars is people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnership. And when you look at the agenda on SDGs, you will see that we have people who focuses much more on poverty and hunger. We have prosperity, which ensures prosperity. We have peace. We have partnership, and then you have planet, about protecting our planet and natural resources. And when you look at the Agenda 63, more or less the same things. You have improved living standards, transformed inclusive and sustainable economies, integrated Africa, empowered women and youth and children, and well-governed and peaceful Africa. Now the question is, are we on track? Colleagues, journalists, what you see on that chart is that there are 3 things that I want to bring to your attention. First of all, if you see a green, it means that particular target, the 17 goals, that particular goal, we are making progress, or there's progress that is being made on the target within that goal. When you see a yellow, it means that there is progress, but that progress is very slow. When you see a yellow but dashed, it says that we are making progress, but we don't have sufficient data to be able to determine how much progress is being made. When you see red, it actually means that we are not making progress. In fact, what is happening is that we are actually regressing. We are going backwards instead of making progress in there. Now, when you look at this chart that we have here, you actually see that we have a number of challenges there. That Africa, first of all, we have made progress in 15 of the 17 goals. And that is the yellow that you're seeing, that we are making progress, but that progress is not sufficient enough to achieve the Agenda 2030. That if we continue at the track the way we are performing on the continent, it is practically impossible to achieve Agenda 2030 as required in the next 8 years. What we also see that we've made progress, moderate progress in goal 3, which is on good health and well-being, some kind of progress on education, some kind of progress on life on land. And basically what it actually means that within that goal, there is one indicator or a few indicators where progress is being registered, and not the entire indicators or targets within that particular goal. We are terribly doing very bad, where we have major challenges in goal 13 on climate action and goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, And again, you can see the situation on the continent where we are really doing very bad because of these wars and so forth. So we are regressing in those areas, and it's not good for the continent. And of course, there's positive development in terms of data availability, which is very good. Countries are beginning to give us data, but we have areas where data has remained very poor. In Goal 5, around gender inequality, in Goal 13, around climate change, around life underwater, and 16, there's only a meager of data that's being provided. There are very, very dismal information that comes through. Yeah. This is basically the when you look at the entire set of SDGs and you look at the targets themselves, what you have here is targets for each goal. The gray areas are telling us that we actually do not have data. Wherever there's gray, it's actually we don't have data. Where there's amber, we are making progress, but not good progress. Where there's red, in such a sense, we are doing very bad, we are going backwards. For instance, on Goal 2 on food security, we're not doing very well. Water use of efficiency, we're doing extremely bad. Inclusion of social, economic, and political welfare, we are doing extremely bad. The physical and political social protection, we're doing very bad. And so forth, where you're seeing red. And you can see the greens, you can literally count them. We only have 5 areas where we are making progress. So out of the 94 measurable targets, Africa is only likely to attain Agenda 2030 in 5 areas if we keep the pace we are at the moment. If we don't change the acceleration of the implementation of Agenda 2030, we will have only made 5 by the end of 2030, and those are the ones that are in green. A similar scenario here being just presented a little bit different to see the target level, what's going on. You see that we are not doing very well, that basically in a number of goals, we have areas where we're actually going backwards, the rate, instead of having to go forwards. And we have very few areas where we're actually making very good progress, and those are the greens. Now, when we look at the sub-regional level, as defined by us here and by the UN, you actually see that for Central Africa, we have 3 goals where we're doing very well. 13 goals, they are stagnant, or they're moving, but really at very, very slow pace. And we have 1 goal where we are doing badly. In East Africa, we have 2 goals where we seem to be making progress. 13 goals, we're doing very badly. We're doing badly, but we are moving. 2 goals, really very badly. North Africa, we have 2 goals where we are making progress. 14 goals, we are stagnant or moving slowly. And 1 goal, we are doing very badly. Southern Africa, a similar situation, 2 goals, 12 goals slowly, and 3 goals stagnant. And then, of course, when you look at the islands and so forth, where some of the landlocked countries are actually not doing very well at all. And because even data is not available in those countries. So that is the very, very, very sad situation that we are in. And I think that countries need to address this situation by providing the data, by measuring them properly so that we can be able to meet Agenda 2030. I must mention here that it's very possible that even some of the countries some of these indicators and targets, we may end up being gray just because countries do not see value for measuring that particular indicator. And because they are focusing on the indicators which are aligned to the National Development Plan. So a much detailed debate needs to be looked at, or rather a conversation needs to be looked at to see what are the targets that countries are interested in, which they're measuring, which are aligned to the National Development Plan, and which ones are not. And then we'll be able to begin to extract and say, look, or maybe the focus is on these ones. They're not focusing on this, maybe because of resources, or for whatever reason that they may have. They have got their own objectives, their own priorities, and so forth. Now, let me talk a little bit about Ethiopia, since we are in Ethiopia, where ICIA is. You can see from that chart that has been put there that in blue, Ethiopia is making progress since 2020, the year 2000. But it is also making bad progress, in fact, regressing when it comes to inequalities. And let's look at the statistics in particular. So first of all, I think we must acknowledge that the country has made progress on SDGs since 2008, 2000. However, I think that if the progress we see at the moment continues, it will not be possible it would not be possible to achieve Agenda 2030. That's one. The second part is, I think, it clearly from what we see on the chart there, that Ethiopia is not on track on any of the goals, because they're lagging in many ways, you can see, as they go towards 2030. However, good progress is being experienced in a few of them. So we see clean water, for instance, there's a progress there, water being provided. We see good progress around affordable clean energy in Goal 7. We see good progress on decent work, economic growth. We see progress in industry, innovation, and industrial infrastructure. We see progress in the issues of responsible consumption and production, which is a good thing. And that's a big plus, and I want to commend the government for those efforts. But these major challenges, the major challenges we see, it is in Goal 10, which is on inequalities. And you can see it is in red. And we see very low progress in Goal 2 around hunger. We see low progress around climate change. We see low progress around peace and justice and strong institutions. That's a problem. And therefore, the country needs to improve really in many of these, but again, much more focusing on agenda and on Goal 5, 13, and 16. So what is the takeaway from here? What we see, journalists, here is that we are making moderate progress in 3, which is Goal 3, Goal 4, and 15. We are making some kind of progress. We're making low progress in Goal 1, 5, 6, 7, 9, 14, and 17. We are stagnant, not really making any tangible progress in Goal 2, 8, 10, 11, and 12. And we have serious challenges where we are regressing in Goal 13 about climate change and the issues around peace, justice, and strong administration in Goal 16. So that is the situation. And I think what I would like to really urge the journalists is to really go behind the countries and ask them to provide the data, collect the data, measure these indicators, so that we are able to be at par like other regions in terms of going forward. So the production of the data, making it available, becomes very key. So what we have done at ECA, we have, as I mentioned earlier on, we now have a dashboard, tracking progress, which all of you should have access to see how countries are performing. And you'll see in some of the cases where countries may have been performing, they may even have registered green, but because additional data has come in, and maybe that additional data is not too sufficient, you find that that goal changes from green to yellow or to amber, because the data has come in, but that data that has come in is not enough to measure progress for the whole entire goal. And as a result, registers as if the country is not doing very, very well. So that is the, I'm putting there on the screen, the dashboard itself, which you can have access to. I want to thank you for listening. As I said, I think it would be nice to have a deeper conversation on very, very specific areas of statistics, because statistics is plural, and there are many areas that we deal with, which we can zero in. For instance, we could discuss maybe just about national accounts or economic statistics, and maybe we could have a discussion around the GDP itself, or we could have a discussion around consumer price index, or maybe about trade and so forth. And maybe we could do another discussion around demographic, looking very, very specific areas like poverty, gender issues, and so forth. So, moderator, thank you very much for listening, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much indeed, Oliver. A very packed presentation, very rich. I wish we had 2 hours to do this, to break down all the areas that you highlighted in your presentation. This is that part of the program where we open it up for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please just text them, or you raise your hand and we'll call you to ask your question. But before that, I mean, it's interesting how this session has unfolded. You started by hitting a chord of optimism. You know, we saw a situation where COVID-19 almost, not almost, actually temporarily teleported us back into the Stone Age, where we could neither record, register our deaths, nor our births. And then we suddenly modernized our system, and then life, it was like hooray. And then we go now to see what progress we're making in terms of the SDGs. To think that we might end up in 2030 scoring a pass mark in only about 5 of the 17 goals is quite alarming. So, I mean, whilst waiting for journalists to ask a question, maybe I might ask you, first of all, how do you communicate such vital information to the governments? Are they aware of this? and what kind of feedback do you get from them? So I'm trying to start from the SDGs segment of your presentation before we go back to the upper one. But please, if you have questions, I see some hands, but kindly please do answer that question on the SDGs. Are the member states aware? How do you reach out to them? What is the feedback you get from them on this matter? Over.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think member states are very much aware of the situation. Perhaps we need to do a little bit more, really, in terms of sensitizing and make them aware of what it actually entails. Now, we have various forums where countries come together to talk about SDGs. One of them is what we call the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. Much more recently, we had one that was held in Kigali, and countries actually, a presentation is made to them and said, this is the situation. And then countries also, sort of provide feedback on the challenges and the countries. I think one of the reasons why these numbers look this way, to be honest, COVID took us back, hit us back tremendously in many of these areas. As a result, we are, one would say maybe we're 10 years back. And now we need to find a way of leapfrogging using the modern methods, transforming the system, the data collection and so forth, even the way that we're reporting. So members are aware of this, but also, unfortunately, we're in a situation where countries are challenged with many other things, not just about COVID, but we have also other issues that have come on board, which are also creating another challenge. And therefore, the prioritization at country level has changed in many of these respects. They probably diverted those resources to go and support COVID areas instead of supporting areas that needs to improve the areas of SDGs. But we also know that there are areas under COVID which may have improved, particularly around health, because a lot of resources went into health. So what we expect to see that when we do another assessment later on in the year is to see a change on those indicators that talk to health. So that is one area, but also, like I mentioned, we have conferences that are coming towards the end of this year. They will be discussing these issues, the ministers responsible for civil restoration, for instance. But it is an issue that requires attention. And I want to call the journalists really to beat the drum and make noise around it so that data can be made available and countries can put more resources into these sectors and also in the data itself.
Wonderful. So we've got a couple of hands up. I'll start with Andualem Sise. If our IT team could allow him to speak, and then right after him, we would hear from Busani Bafana. Andualem, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. It was a nice presentation, and as you said, data is very critical, and it is in fact called now the new gold, because many of those wealthy.
If I may,
can you hear me?
Yes, if you don't mind presenting yourself, which news outlet you're working for, just so we know who we're talking with. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Andualem Sisai. I'm a journalist. I'm a founder of New Business Ethiopia. It's an online media which was established 13 years ago. And we do more of business and economic and social issues. So having said that, when I get back to the issue, as you said, as Mr. Oliver said, data is very critical, and it's very challenging to obtain. As a journalist, we have been facing lots of challenges. So the fact that you mentioned that there is one project that you are working to make sure that data is not only collected by only the national data centers which is funded by the government. You said that there is a plan to incorporate civil societies and private sectors in data collection and analyzing. I think is the best move from what we have seen as a challenge. Because most of the time in many African countries, what we see is that the local level data is always manipulated when it's reached as the central level. So it has become more of politicized, and always there is a brushing at the top level, and it doesn't show us the full picture of what is going on the ground. So in that regard, I just want to ask the Africa Center for Statistics on how they may collaborate with especially medias like us, who try to introduce data journalism especially in economic and social sectors. We have been trying to get to have on the grassroots level data, but still it's challenging for especially small media houses to have such a network. But if the center probably consider in assisting such media houses who are trying to introduce data journalism in those social and economic sector, would be beneficiary. I just want to comment on that one, and if Mr. Oliver have anything to say, or if any plan with to work with the private sector, especially independent media outlets, because it will give us a comparison with data that will be provided by the central government. That's what I'm saying. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andualen. Maybe we just take about 3 questions. So another question that's kind of related to last point, the actual question the last point he made was, not the last point, is from Adele Sabri. His question is to know if after you would have, those who are in charge of collecting the data would have done so. Is there any other layer of verification that is done by probably an independent entity, to make sure that the process is really neutral? That's the question we got from Adele. And Busani, if you're still there,
Thank
you
you.
can take the floor.
Thanks so much. My name is Busani Bafana. I write for the Interpress Service based in Zimbabwe. My question really, thank you, Mr. Chianga, for your presentation. I'm keen to understand that the production and sharing of statistics at national and regional level, as it were, is it in any way bound by any binding policies or commitments in Africa? Are countries having a binding agreement to share this data and these statistics? And secondly, would you say countries are valuing the importance of generating and sharing this data? Because from your dashboard, we are not looking very successful, as it were, in attaining the Agenda 2063 and other goals. So I'm keen to actually find out, have you found out whether countries really value the importance of data, or there is a limited understanding of the importance of this data? I thank you.
All right, Oliver, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you, journalists, for those very useful questions. I think the first question, I think, is very critical, the one that came from Sise from Ethiopia. I think one of the things that we are really craving to do, working with the teachers, with the NSC team, is how we can work with journalists to improve the statistical literacy. And I think it is to be useful to have some kind of a session where we can discuss interpretation of data sources, the difference between official statistics and non-official statistics, and so forth. I think it would be nice that we have a session on that at some point. So I'm going to appeal to NSGOG so that we can have a session where we can go through some of these, more or less like a training, if you like, to sort of make the journalists much more abreast in terms of accessibility and improve the statistical literacy. I want to believe that if journalists can have a good interpretation of the data and its sources, it will be easier to get the citizens also to be able to understand and increase their statistical literacy. Because at the moment, what is happening is the following. We have what I call the data enthusiasts. These are not statisticians. We are also curating, coming up with data, and they have the tools because they are supported from whoever supports them to be able to produce data in a very quicker form. And some of these things have become so appealing to government. A Minister X wants data on maybe water sanitation, and someone, because he's using satellites, is able to get information to able to pinpoint the water points in the country. The National Statistical doesn't have that capacity to do that. And that becomes a problem. So the question is that how sure are we that what has been provided to the minister, which looks very appealing, because the minister wants the data now, is accurate compared to what has been produced by the National Statistical Office? So that kind of situation is quite concerning, because by the time they realize that the information they received was not as accurate, because then the statistician would have come maybe 2 weeks later and said, no, but the actual correct data is this. The policy decision has been made. And therefore we need to see how we can correct that. So one way of correcting that is investment in the national statistical processes for them to be able to work with the private sector, with the academia, and the other entities, the civil society and NGOs that have some analytical capacity to come up with issues much quicker. And also to help ensure that even the data that's collected by the academia, the civil society and NGOs can be turned into official, in other words, can be validated and be used for official statistics. So to me, I think sitting down with the journalists to be able to address these issues will be very useful, will be very, very useful. And then we have, of course, the issue about validation of data. I think validation of data comes in two forms. The countries validate data, and the National Statistical System, I can tell you that they are very, very well trained, as good as the ones in the West. Perhaps the problem will be that they don't have the numbers and the skills in some of the areas, because we have not been able to invest a little bit more for them to do that. But the validation process is there. There's a mechanism, there are tools, there are manuals that are developed to validate the data. And no data can actually go out to that, going through that validation process. So there is a validation process that is set up. And when I talked about the system of national accounts, that system of national accounts itself has validation mechanism and tools before you actually get the national accounts out there. Then there was a question that came from Botswana, from Zimbabwe, Busani Bafana, issues of sharing data. First of all countries have signed up to what we call the Africa Statistics Charter. And that charter dictates that countries have to be transparent, have to follow the fundamental principles of the UN. They have to adhere to the standards and the requirements of producing data. So there are these frameworks that have been put in place to do that. The problem is when it comes to sharing the data, many of our countries do not have the capacity to be able to share the data, to put it on the website, to create a platform where everyone can go and tap data. They don't have the resources to set up that kind of mechanism. It's not that they don't want to do that, but they don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources to do that. So again, it's for the countries, really the government to put in a little bit more resources to do that, put in even what we call an advanced release calendar to inform the users when the data is going to be made available, so that everyone is aware that, oh, the consumer price index data is going to be available on this date. So there are mechanisms, and the countries would like to share the data, but the issue of capacity to do some of these things, but they don't have resources. I must say that all governments are saying data is important. Everyone, if you talk to any head of state, they'll tell you statistics are very important. But the problem, that importance is not matched with the investment that is required. And that is where the problem is. That we are talking about the importance, you will find that statistics is the last thing to talk about. Even when they develop a national development plan, they only stop to think about the statisticians when the plan has been finished. That's when they realize, oh, but we need the data. But you need data. Why don't you bring them when you develop a national development plan, so that as you come up with a policy, they will tell you what kind of data is available. So it is important, but it comes last in terms of investment, in terms of application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I don't know if there's any French-speaking colleague from the team, just to make sure that my translation of Adele's question was correct. If I got it wrong, please kindly help translate so that Oliver can answer the right question, but I think that's what it was. Now we have another question, two questions actually, from Divan, ENCA in South Africa. His first question is, in South Africa, our national statistics development is struggling with funding from government to ensure that it has the resources to deliver quality results. Although it's confident of its figures, it needs more funding. How widespread is this on the continent, and what are the low-hanging fruits to resolve that? That's question number one. Question number two is, which country reflects a good example of where technological advancement and an improved policy has uplifted the statistics delivery?
Thank you.
So
Thank
if you
you
want
very
to
much.
pursue, yes. And just for the colleagues again, if anyone has a question, you need to raise your hand, and then you'd be allowed to speak, or you could text, drop in a text box as well. Over to you, Oliver.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very important questions. The issue of funding in South Africa, it's a very recent phenomenon. I think it was one of those countries that we used to all look up to. They used to have very good funding arrangement there, but I think for some reason. But the issue of funding is spread over the continent. The problem with the statistics when it comes to the policymakers is looked at differently. Remember, policymakers, they have a constituency which they have to please, if you like. And one way for doing that is to be able to show something that is tangible. And statistics are not tangible, but they are the ones that inform whatever is tangible. So what do I mean? The policymakers want to be seen to develop a project like a school. So they'll put in the resources there, and the constituency, they'll be able to say, no, we've seen a bridge, we've seen a school, and so forth. But to be able to put up a bridge and a school, you need the statistics to inform what kind of school and who is going to be attending that. And that's the most important. There are some countries, I'm not going to mention one, where one school was built and there was a population there. And later on, the population disappeared. But they did not, the reason why they disappeared, they did not realize this, so there was a nomadic population that was on the move. So the school remained, white elephant. But if they had involved the statistics, they would have told them, look, this school is temporary. What you need is maybe a mobile school rather than having to put a project. So the problem we're having is across the continent, statistics is funded very dismally in most of our countries and needs to be addressed. But there are countries where the difference is being made. And this leads to me the next question about, is there countries where technology is really being put to effect? Yes, there are countries. There are a few countries on the continent that are really making progress using the new technology. Rwanda is a good example. I talked about the digital data science, the regional data hub. Again, you can see the commitment of the leadership there in putting more resources into technology, into the data collection. And you go into Rwanda, you actually see the national statistical system very well resourced. They have a data science campus. It's the only country on the continent with the data science that looks at big data issues and things like that. You have Mauritius also, to a very large extent, that some of the data processes, they use the technology. And a few others, that in pockets, really, they're using modern technologies. So there are countries that are using modern technologies in pockets. There are countries that have approached much more holistically. And in terms of resources, development partners, unfortunately, in the last 3 years, the funding has been has slowed down, and for reasons that we all know. And we have also seen a similar situation from governments slowing down to providing resources towards these kinds of things. A good example is that we're in the 2020 round of censuses and population of censuses. We started in 2015 and we're coming to an end in 2024. We have only 17 countries out of 54 UN countries that have collected their censuses, and yet we only have 2 years to go. It is not possible that the remaining countries can do their census in the last two years. It's not possible. So we will have hit ourselves, even when we talk about SDGs, if we don't collect information from the censuses, even information for SDGs will be critical, will be missing, because we will not have information to be able to inform the SDGs as well, because censuses have not been collected.
Okay, thank you. We have, I think, 3 more questions in the chat box. The first one is from Brian Gugi Njorosh. He says, thank you for the presentation. He's from the Nation Media Group in Nairobi. So you cited the importance of modernizing the way African countries collect data on prices to kind of gauge the nation's inflation rate, for example, by getting the price information directly and electronically. How important is it at this time, or how important is this at a time the consumer price index, the most widely tracked measure of inflation, is at the center of global focus, with inflation witnessing a runaway spike in many African countries like Kenya? That's the first question. And then the second one is, please, could you kindly elaborate on the latest projects you're working on in Kenya in regards to assisting the country or the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics modernize its data collection methods and tools? So that's for the two questions from Brian. And then we have another question from Sandu Ndamui. She says she's the editor of Business Times newspaper in Zimbabwe. You indicated that ECA is providing capacity building for gender statistics and monitoring systems for 4 fragile states, including Zimbabwe. How long has the program been in place, and why and when would it end? What kind of support are you providing to Zimbabwe, for example? Will the program be extended to other countries? And then the last question is from Faith Chelai. She says, I have a question about the effect of interdependence among these goals, the SDGs that is, when we report the progress in each goal. I have a question about the effect of interdependence among these goals when we report the progress in each goals. Are we in face of a situation to use statistics to solve problems and elaborate policies rather than lack of such statistics? Okay. So those are the questions that go through the chat box.
Thank you.
And if you want to also just take this last one from Busani, he says, what consequences would you say Africa is suffering by having poor statistics?
Okay. Thank you very much. CPI, how important is it? The consumer price index, especially now where we are faced with food crisis, we are seeing spikes of food increases, inflation in some countries, in Ethiopia, over 50% or so in some of the areas, becomes very important, because then it becomes a barometer, if you like, a gauge, a thermometer, whichever way one wants to look to see what's the temperature of the economy, how is it performing. And the consumer price index, the inflation, is a good measure. It's an indication of what is actually going on and which areas are actually being impinging on people's lives, for instance. And we've seen food being one of them, where we are seeing really serious changes and affecting people and pushing people into poverty. Millions of people going into poverty because they're not able to afford purchasing food, because then the prices have gone up. So that is very, very important, that this is the country is able to measure on a monthly basis. In fact, each country should have a point in a month, very regular and consistent on that particular day. They actually release the inflation. So it's very, very important to have that. Now, what are we doing in Kenya? One of the things that I mentioned already was the census that we are all proud that Kenya was able to do the census in 3 months. That is one of our flagship. We're very proud, and support that came from the president of Kenya in that respect. But going forward, I think the bigger part that we are working with Kenya is 2 things. One is the improvement of the civil registration advice. This is civil registration and vital statistics, to make sure that it is digitalized. And we're working with them very closely in that area, but also we're working with them in the transforming of the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics to make sure that it's modernized. I think Kenya is already making very serious strides in that area, because they're using hand gadgets to collect the data. So that's transformation that is going on there, and we're very proud to be part of it. Gender statistics, this is a pilot work that we have started in 4 countries, and the idea is that after the pilots have, is successful, is to escalate it, or expand it to bring other countries on board to be part of that pilot. What are we doing there? First of all, is to help countries develop gender-sensitive policies, strategies that are gender-sensitive, to make sure that there's inclusivity in the policies that are being developed. We are trying to help to do that through this network of these countries, and we're hopeful that eventually you can see them being gendered in their policies, in the national development plans, to make the changes that are necessary. And this is, for now, the pilot is a 2-year program, but of course, subject to funding, we should be able to expand beyond the 2 years. But for now, we have funding from the African Development Bank to support us in there. Interdependence is very true, but you know what happens in statistics? We have the method, the technology, the approaches that allows us to remove the interdependency to a very large extent, so that when you talk about one goal, you have excluded any effect of another goal or any other impact or any other likelihood of influence from another particular target or goal. So we have the mechanism of that, but of course, some of these things you cannot eliminate completely. And therefore, when you are making interpretation, you need to take care of that to make sure that that interdependency is taken care of. What are the consequences? I think the consequences of having no numbers is that someone else is going to make up those numbers, which might not be true, and eventually you will not be able to attract investors. Here's how it works. When you go to the bank and you want to get a loan, they want to get information about you. How credible are you? What kind of resources, what collateral do you have if you have to get a loan? Similarly with an investor, he wants to come in a country to see how does your GDP look like? How is your fiscal space looks like? Are you able to pay? And this is why in the end, you find that, you know, for Africa, we end up paying, some of the African countries, we end up paying much higher rates when we borrow outside because we are not credible enough. And then we begin to ask, but how come country X in Europe or in Asia is paying less than we are? But because they have given all the numbers, but we have not given a number. So the consequence of that is that the less transparent we are, the more we hate ourselves by not getting the necessary support that we need to support our infrastructure and social development in the countries. So those are the consequences. And therefore, if you don't have the numbers, you're not being able to develop. Those are the consequences. So you need to know the numbers about yourself before you even think about where you want to go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Oliver. It's been brilliant. It's been wonderful, really, really insightful. I really, really appreciate that you took the time to make this presentation. And thank you so much to the journalists for coming. I think we've gone overboard by quite some minutes. Before I allow you take 30 or so seconds to close, I just wanted to come back to Andualem's point on collaboration with media that's reporting on data and statistics and so on, which is very important. In addition to what the director said, which has to do with creating that platform where we enhance the capacity and ability of reporters to tell the stories, is that we also at the communications section, we are planning, it's still in the works, but that to organize kind of an ECA Media Award. In other words, that we recognize and reward journalists for reporting, for good quality reporting in some of these areas. We've done, we do these trainings on CFTA reporting, on climate reporting, and as he said, we'll be organizing one also for statistics and data. So rest assured that we are really working on fortifying that kind of, seamless collaboration between the EC and the media, so that wherever your needs are, we will meet you, and wherever our needs are, we're hoping that will meet us. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to send them by email. You could send them to me, of course. Sophia is there with our media boss. You reach out to Sophia directly, and we have the experts in-house. Any of the areas touched on by the director, if you like some more details on those, send your questions. If you need interviews, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will schedule those for you. So with that said, I'll let Oliver take the last few, maybe 30 seconds to wrap up, and we will call it a day.
Thank you very much, Marita, and thank you, Dennis, really for those very useful questions. I want to believe that you will, as with immediate effect, begin to see how you can support countries, your countries, African countries, to improve and increase the data literacy, to understand why data is important. Our governments to put a little bit more resources, invest in the data, in the infrastructure, and into technology. If we don't invest in this technology, we are dead. We will not be able to do what is required. We will not be able to meet the Agenda 2030, Agenda 2063. We'll be making progress, but this will be pocket progress. We'll be making progress in some areas, but whole family will not be making progress. And I think it's not very helpful that we have 6 countries that are making progress if the entire continent is not making progress. We have to make progress together, and it requires a concerted effort, and I think you have a role as journalists to make that possible by informing the citizens in the country of what the data is all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, colleagues of the EC, and thank you, colleagues of the press. It was a pleasure spending these minutes with you. Enjoy the rest of your day and looking forward to getting in touch with you on the emails for questions and for interviews and what have you. And let's just get together. Thanks and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.